alien abduction is a phenomenon that has fascinated, terrified, and mystified humanity for decades. At its core, an alien abduction involves the alleged involuntary transportation of an individual from their familiar environment to an extraterrestrial craft or another location controlled by non-human intelligences. Witnesses frequently report being subjected to medical-like examinations, interrogations, or other interactions that defy conventional explanations. While skeptics often dismiss these accounts as hallucinations, sleep paralysis, or psychological conditions, the sheer consistency and number of reports worldwide have made alien abduction a legitimate area of interest for researchers and paranormal investigators alike. The experiences, though extraordinary, are strikingly uniform in many ways, which raises profound questions about the boundaries of human perception, consciousness, and reality itself. The history of alien abduction reports is surprisingly modern. While myths and legends of strange creatures visiting humans date back centuries, the contemporary narrative emerges primarily in the mid-20th century. The 1950s saw a surge in UFO sightings and reports of unexplained encounters in the United States and Europe, coinciding with the dawn of the space age. These decades marked the beginning of documented alien abduction claims that went beyond mere sightings to include physical interaction and psychological impact on the individuals involved. Researchers began collecting detailed accounts, noting common patterns, and attempting to understand whether these experiences were purely psychological phenomena or indicative of something more enigmatic. Early cases often involved ordinary people, farmers, students, housewives, suddenly thrust into experiences they could neither anticipate nor fully articulate afterward. One of the most pivotal figures in the study of alien abductions is Dr. John E. Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist who approached the subject with rigor and open-mindedness. In the 1990s, Mack interviewed dozens of alleged abductees, noting the profound psychological effects these encounters had on their lives. Unlike previous skeptics, he argued that the experiences were real to the participants and often transformative, whether or not they could be objectively verified. Similarly, Bud Hopkins, an artist-turned-researcher, gathered hundreds of accounts over decades, focusing on the patterns of abduction narratives, the recurring descriptions of extraterrestrial beings, and the environmental conditions surrounding the events. Hopkins' research highlighted that many abductees experienced missing time, strange markings on their bodies, and vivid recollections under hypnosis. These studies provided a foundational understanding of the phenomenon and suggested that alien abductions, regardless of their origin, leave deep and lasting impressions on the human psyche. A particularly chilling subset of abduction reports involves bedroom visitations, where the alien encounters occur while the individual is asleep, often in the sanctuary of their own home. This phenomenon is especially disturbing because it targets humans at a time and place where they are most vulnerable, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. Bedrooms are inherently private, safe spaces, places where people shed the defenses of daily life and succumb to rest. The intrusion of an alien presence in this context heightens the sense of helplessness and fear. Many abductees describe waking to find themselves paralyzed, unable to move or scream, while observing inexplicable lights, sounds, or the presence of beings at the edge of consciousness. The combination of sleep, darkness, and the intimate environment of the bedroom seems to create a unique psychological state in which the experience is not only terrifying but also more vividly remembered and, for some, more traumatic. Statistics surrounding alien abductions are inherently difficult to verify due to the subjective and often secretive nature of the experiences. Nevertheless, researchers have compiled compelling data over the decades. Dr. John Mack's studies suggested that a significant portion of his subjects, those who believed themselves to have been abducted, reported recurring abduction experiences, often beginning in childhood. Hopkins, through his longitudinal research, found that many abductees shared similar characteristics in the aliens' descriptions, the methods of examination, and even the way communication was conducted. The consistency across continents, cultures, and ages is striking, suggesting either a shared archetypal experience or an unexplained phenomenon that transcends human geography. The recurring elements, bright lights, sensations of levitation, and medical procedures, create a recognizable pattern that has become almost synonymous with modern alien abduction narratives. Transitioning from this overview into personal accounts, the stories take on an even more compelling form. While statistics and research provide a framework, the true impact of alien abductions is perhaps best understood through the voices of those who have lived it. First-person accounts reveal not only the terror and confusion experienced during the events, but also the lingering psychological and emotional consequences. These narratives often begin in the quiet of the night, in the vulnerable stillness of a bedroom, where sleep and consciousness intersect in strange and sometimes horrifying ways. As these individuals recount their experiences, patterns emerge, patterns that echo the broader findings of Mack, Hopkins, and other researchers, linking individual stories to a wider, mysterious tapestry of unexplained encounters. It is within these stories that the phenomenon of bedroom visitations gains its most haunting clarity, illustrating why alien abductions remain one of the most unsettling mysteries of the modern age. It began on a quiet autumn night in a small town nestled on the outskirts of rural New England. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where streets were lined with maples shedding their golden leaves, and the only sounds past midnight were the occasional creak of a wooden porch or the distant bark of a dog. For the abductee, a young woman in her early 20s named Laura, the night had begun like any other. She had completed her evening routine, checking the locks on her doors, brushing her teeth, and slipping into bed with the comforting weight of her quilt. The room was still, bathed in the soft, ambient glow of a streetlight filtering through half-closed blinds. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, rustling leaves against the windowpane. Everything suggested safety, normalcy, and the predictable rhythm of a quiet night. Yet, in the span of moments, that ordinary sense of security would dissolve into a surreal and terrifying ordeal that would forever alter her perception of reality. The first hint that something was amiss was subtle. Laura remembered feeling a strange heaviness pressing down on her chest, as though an unseen force had settled over her body. At first, she assumed it was merely fatigue, the natural consequence of a long day, but the sensation deepened with unnatural intensity. The shadows in the room seemed darker, more defined, as if moving independently of the flickering light. A low, humming vibration filled the air, so faint at first that she questioned her own hearing. But then came the light, a sudden, piercing beam that seeped around the edges of the blinds. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, neither the yellow of a lamp nor the cool white of moonlight. The illumination pulsed gently, almost rhythmically, casting long, unnatural shadows across her walls and ceiling. With it came a sensation of floating, as if the bed itself had become less grounded, tilting imperceptibly beneath her weight. Laura's heart began to race. Fear prickled at the base of her skull, spreading down her spine in sharp, electric bursts. Then came the sound, a low, almost mechanical whirring, punctuated by faint clicking noises that seemed to move around the room. Her rational mind searched for explanation, a drone outside, the furnace kicking in, but nothing fit. The sounds were too precise, too deliberate, as if orchestrated in tandem with the strange light that now bathed the room. The air itself seemed charged, thick and viscous, making every breath feel shallow, almost stolen. Laura tried to speak, to call out for help, but her voice caught in her throat. An inexplicable paralysis gripped her arms and legs, pinning her to the mattress. Panic surged, but it was mingled with a perplexing sense of inevitability, as if she were simultaneously resisting and drawn toward an experience she could neither comprehend nor escape. Then they appeared. The first entity emerged from the edges of the light, stepping, or perhaps gliding, into the center of the room. Laura could see a figure, small and humanoid, its skin a smooth, almost reflective gray. Its head was disproportionately large, the black, almond-shaped eyes unblinking and penetrating. There was no mouth visible, no discernible features that could convey emotion in the conventional sense, yet Laura felt herself scrutinized, measured, as if the creature was peering directly into the depths of her mind. Behind the first figure, others materialized in similar fashion, emerging from the soft illumination like shadows becoming substance. Their movements were fluid, deliberate, almost hypnotic, and each step seemed to leave no mark upon the floor yet resonated with a subtle vibration through the mattress. The interaction was as surreal as it was terrifying. One of the beings reached toward her, its slender appendages extending with precision and care. Laura felt a sensation that defied description, an alternating push and pull, as though her body were both resisting and yielding simultaneously. The creature's touch was cold, yet oddly weightless, and though it made no sound, communication seemed to occur in bursts of images and emotions projected directly into her consciousness. Fear, confusion, and curiosity collided within her. She felt a torrent of alien sensations, flashes of landscapes she had never seen, abstract patterns of color and motion, and a deep, almost electrical awareness of the room's altered space. The being's examination was meticulous but non-violent. They observed, interacted, and recorded in ways that left Laura feeling both violated and strangely understood, as if she had been transported into an incomprehensible but coherent framework of intelligence beyond her comprehension. Her terror intensified as moments stretched into an eternity. Laura's mind struggled to anchor itself in familiar reality, yet every instinct screamed that the ordinary laws of physics and biology no longer applied. The beings manipulated the space around her subtly, causing objects in the room to shimmer, distort, or briefly hover. Her quilt shifted without contact, the bed seemed to elongate slightly, and the shadows played tricks on her eyes, morphing into shapes that suggested movement where none should exist. She experienced a simultaneous sense of weightlessness and pressure, as though the room itself had become a fluid medium, bending and compressing her body without leaving a physical trace. Yet even in the midst of such disorientation, Laura was hyper-aware of every detail. The fine fibers of her blanket, the faint scent of night air drifting through the window, the metallic tang that seemed to permeate the atmosphere, subtle but insistent. Time became a fractured construct. Minutes felt like hours, hours like instants. Eventually, the beings receded, gliding backward into the edges of the light. The luminescence dimmed, the low hum faded, and the normal shadows of the room returned. Laura found herself lying in her bed, trembling, drenched in sweat, her muscles stiff from the paralyzing grip she could not explain. She struggled to move, to speak, to breathe in a rhythm that reassured her she was truly in the world she knew. In the following hours, the terror lingered, mingled with disbelief and an eerie sense of wonder. What had just occurred? Was it real, a dream, or something else entirely? The room, once a sanctuary, felt alien, charged with residual energy that seemed to cling to the walls, the air, and her very being. The aftermath was both immediate and enduring. Laura discovered subtle but inexplicable signs that the experience had left traces. Faint, circular marks on her wrists, an unusual coldness in the bed where the entities had hovered, and a persistent low hum in her ears that lasted for days. Sleep became fraught with nightmares, fragmented recollections of the visitation, and intense dreams in which the beings returned, sometimes gentler, sometimes more menacing. Friends and family noticed a change in her demeanor, quiet introspection, sudden fatigue, and moments of distraction that could not be rationalized. Over the coming weeks, Laura attempted to make sense of what had occurred, researching reports of similar encounters and discovering a pattern that mirrored her own experiences. Paralyzing sensations, bright lights, low humming, small humanoid figures with black eyes, and a profound psychological impact. It was in these patterns that the subtle transition to other stories begins. While Laura's account is harrowing and unique in its immediacy and detail, it is not an isolated case. Many abductees recount remarkably similar sequences. The intrusion into the bedroom, the immobilization, the presence of small grey beings, the interaction that combines fear and fascination, and the lingering effects that ripple through sleep, consciousness, and daily life. These shared elements suggest an underlying framework to the phenomenon, one that will become more apparent as we explore additional narratives. Each account builds upon the previous, revealing both the terrifying diversity and the persistent consistency of alien abduction experiences. It is within this continuum that the larger mystery begins to unfold, hinting at forces and intelligences that remain, as yet, beyond human understanding. The moments immediately following a bedroom visitation are often only the beginning of a prolonged and disorienting ordeal. While the abduction itself may last mere minutes, or stretch into what seems like hours, the psychological and physical effects can endure for weeks, months, or even years. For abductees, the aftermath is rarely a return to normalcy. Instead, it manifests as a complex interplay of memory gaps, fragmented dreams, heightened anxiety, and physical anomalies that cannot be readily explained. What begins as an extraordinary night of terror gradually infiltrates everyday life, shaping routines, relationships, and even one's sense of self. Understanding these effects is crucial, not only for validating the experiences of abductees, but also for exploring the broader implications of these phenomena on human psychology and physiology. One of the most commonly reported effects is a form of sleep disruption that goes far beyond ordinary insomnia. Victims frequently describe an overwhelming fear of going to bed, driven by the anticipation of recurrence. Nighttime, once a place of rest, becomes a potential arena for another inexplicable encounter. Many individuals report vivid, recurring nightmares that replay the abduction, often with slight variations, creating a loop of terror that erodes the boundaries between dreams and waking life. In some cases, these nightmares are so intense that they lead to partial sleep deprivation, chronic fatigue, and heightened irritability. The experience is sometimes compounded by an episode that closely mimics sleep paralysis, a phenomenon in which the body is temporarily immobile while the mind remains conscious. In traditional sleep paralysis, individuals often perceive a weight on their chest or a menacing presence in the room. While skeptics may equate alien abductions with such events, abductees insist that the sensations go beyond typical paralysis. The presence is tangible, the light and movement are consistent across multiple experiences, and there is often a coherent narrative that unfolds with entities interacting in real time. Alongside sleep disturbances, emotional trauma manifests in a variety of ways. Anxiety and phobias become common companions. A simple shadow in the bedroom, a flicker of light, or even the act of lying down can trigger a cascade of panic. Some abductees develop an acute fear of sleeping alone, while others report avoidance of specific environments that mirror the setting of their visitation. Social interactions are also affected. Individuals may withdraw from friends and family, fearing disbelief or ridicule, leading to isolation that exacerbates their mental strain. Depression and chronic stress frequently emerge as secondary consequences, reflecting the deep, lingering impact of experiences that defy conventional understanding. Physical effects, while less commonly discussed, are equally compelling. Numerous abductees report unexplained bruises, small circular scars, or faint markings on their bodies that appear without injury. These signs often correlate with areas described during the examination process in the abduction, such as wrists, ankles, or the lower back. Some describe subtle, almost imperceptible burns or abrasions that defy medical explanation. In other cases, abductees experience sudden shifts in sensitivity, such as heightened awareness to light or sound, temporary numbness, or unexplainable tingling in extremities. The physiological impact is not limited to localized effects. It often extends to an overall sense of malaise, sudden changes in appetite, or unusual patterns of fatigue that appear cyclically, sometimes coinciding with sleep patterns. The combination of physical markers and psychological disruption reinforces the profound, multifaceted nature of the aftermath. Memory repression is another critical element of the post-abduction experience. Many individuals cannot recall the events immediately following the visitation, or their recollections emerge only under hypnosis or with the aid of regression techniques. These gaps in memory create a sense of disconnection from one's own life, leaving abductees uncertain about what truly occurred. The repression can function as a psychological defense, shielding the conscious mind from overwhelming fear, yet it also creates significant distress and confusion when fragmented memories begin to surface unexpectedly. Flashbacks can occur at random, sometimes triggered by mundane stimuli. A similar light, a specific sound, or even a familiar scent, reawakening terror long after the initial event. The dissonance between remembered and forgotten experiences can lead to self-doubt, difficulty concentrating, and persistent questions about one's own mental stability. In addition to memory gaps, the mental strain often manifests as heightened sensory perception. Abductees frequently describe hyper-awareness of light, sound, and movement, as though their nervous systems have been recalibrated. Ordinary stimuli, such as the glow of a streetlight through the blinds or the hum of an appliance, may be perceived with unnatural intensity, often eliciting unease. This heightened perception may serve as both a lingering echo of the visitation and a protective mechanism, keeping the individual alert to potential recurrence. It also reinforces the sense that the events are not merely figments of imagination, but experiences with a tangible, enduring presence. Long-term psychological effects extend into personal identity and worldview. Individuals often report a re-evaluation of their place in the universe, grappling with existential questions about life, consciousness, and human significance. For some, the experience catalyzes a spiritual awakening or a shift in beliefs, while for others it deepens existential fear and alienation. The struggle to integrate the extraordinary into the ordinary can be a continuous process, marked by cycles of acceptance, denial, and reinterpretation of the experiences. Relationships are frequently affected, as abductees may find it difficult to communicate the reality of their experiences without fear of judgment, further isolating them from support networks. Cumulative trauma also plays a significant role. Recurrent visits, or the anticipation thereof, can create a state of chronic stress, leaving the abductee in a heightened state of vigilance. This vigilance is both psychological and physiological, manifesting in persistent muscle tension, headaches, and heightened startle responses. Sleep disruption, anxiety, and physical manifestations feed into one another, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the abduction's lingering impact. Even in periods when no apparent visitation occurs, abductees often report a sense of unease, a subtle tension in the body and mind, as though the events have left a permanent imprint on their consciousness. The interplay between psychological and physical effects underscores the complex reality of alien abduction experiences. Unlike typical trauma, which may have clear external causes, the sources of these effects are often invisible, intangible, and resistant to conventional analysis. Abductees live in a liminal space, suspended between fear and curiosity, memory and repression, ordinary reality, and an inexplicable intrusion that challenges every assumption about the world. The patterns observed in Laura's case and others suggest a continuity that transcends individual experience, revealing a structured phenomenon rather than isolated incidents. The recurrence of specific symptoms, sleep paralysis-like immobility, vivid nightmares, physical marks, and persistent anxiety, points to a deeper, possibly universal template that frames the visitation experience. As the psychological and physical aftermath unfolds, a subtle yet significant connection emerges with more extreme cases. While some individuals experience relatively brief encounters followed by manageable effects, others endure repeated, intense visitations that magnify both mental and physiological consequences. The line between ordinary trauma and profound transformation, or even destabilization, is delicate, and it is within these more extreme narratives that the full scope of alien influence becomes apparent. These cases reveal the capacity of the phenomenon to extend beyond a single night, insinuating itself into the very fabric of memory, emotion, and perception. It is a reminder that what begins in the quiet of a bedroom can ripple outward into every aspect of an individual's life, setting the stage for even more extraordinary and harrowing experiences. It was nearly midnight when Mark, a 32-year-old graphic designer living alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of a bustling city, first sensed that something was wrong. The apartment had been quiet all evening, filled only with the soft hum of his computer fan and the distant murmur of traffic outside. He had fallen asleep on his unmade bed, exhausted from a long day at work, but in the dead of night a sudden chill pulled him from sleep. His eyes fluttered open, adjusting slowly to the dim, familiar surroundings, and for a fleeting moment everything seemed normal. The glow of the streetlights outside painted the walls in muted stripes, and the familiar clutter of books, sketches, and a half-empty coffee mug was exactly where he had left it. Yet, beneath the surface of ordinary stillness, a tension had begun to build, a subtle vibration in the air, an almost imperceptible hum that seemed to resonate with his chest. At first, Mark thought it was merely a dream, the remnants of stress manifesting as auditory hallucinations. But the sensation intensified. A soft, irregular clicking sound echoed from the far corner of the room, accompanied by a faint, pulsating light that shimmered across the ceiling. It was not a lamp, not a reflection from passing car headlights, and not the soft glow of his digital alarm clock. The light moved with an uncanny fluidity, expanding and contracting rhythmically, casting distorted shadows that seemed to slither across the walls. His rational mind attempted to anchor itself to familiar explanations, but a growing sense of unease quickly overpowered logic. The air in the room thickened, carrying a metallic tang that pricked his senses, and Mark realized with dawning terror that he could not move. His limbs were unresponsive, as though the mattress itself had fused with his body, holding him captive in a grip that felt simultaneously gentle and unyielding. Then they appeared. Unlike the relatively uniform greys of the previous cases, these entities were more varied, more alien in appearance, and undeniably more unsettling. One hovered near the foot of the bed, its elongated limbs coiling and flexing in ways that defied anatomical logic. Its skin was a muted iridescent green, smooth yet seemingly textured with microscopic ridges that shimmered under the flickering light. Its eyes, large and multifaceted like those of an insect, glowed faintly with an amber hue that seemed to pierce Mark's very thoughts. Behind it, another figure moved in staccato motions, almost like a puppet on invisible strings. Its torso rotated in ways no human skeleton could accommodate, and its hands, if they could be called hands, extended into multiple slender tendrils, each tipped with a fine, needle-like appendage. The third entity remained partially in shadow, its outline ambiguous, constantly shifting in size and shape, suggesting a fluidity that defied conventional physics. Mark's terror was immediate and visceral. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet he remained frozen, observing with a mixture of horror and fascination. The entities did not speak in words, at least not in any language he understood. Instead, communication occurred through direct imposition on consciousness, a torrent of images, feelings, and impressions that assaulted his mind simultaneously. He perceived flashes of alien landscapes, geometric patterns of blindingly intricate complexity, and waves of emotion that were alien yet eerily familiar. The sensation was both invasive and strangely intimate, as though the beings were attempting to convey a message without uttering a single syllable. His own thoughts, previously organized and coherent, became fragmented, surfacing in disconnected bursts of memory and anticipation, fear and wonder interwoven in a chaotic tapestry. The interaction between abductee and entity intensified when one of the figures moved closer, hovering just above his chest. Mark felt an inexplicable pull, as if his body were being drawn into a vortex of energy emanating from the creature. A pressure built around his torso, constricting yet strangely weightless, while a delicate, almost imperceptible probing sensation coursed along his arms and legs. He could feel every nerve ending firing in response, an intricate combination of pain, awareness, and awe. Despite the terror, he attempted to communicate, to plead or question, but the entities seemed to respond in images rather than words, sequences of abstract shapes, color shifts, and emotionally charged impressions that left him overwhelmed yet unable to resist the hypnotic cadence of the visitation. Odd phenomena in the room compounded the horror. Objects began to move independently, subtly at first. A notebook slid across the desk without human contact. The curtain fluttered though the window remained closed, and a pen rolled slowly, as if guided by an invisible hand. The ambient lights flickered erratically, sometimes dimming to near darkness, and then exploding into sudden brilliance that reflected off walls and ceiling. Electronic devices hummed, beeped, and powered on without warning. His phone screen flashed with unintelligible symbols, and the digital clock counted down in fragmented sequences that defied any rational chronology. These disturbances created an atmosphere of unrelenting tension, a sense that the very fabric of the room had become a malleable medium under the control of the visiting entities. Mark's perception of time became completely unmoored. What might have been a few minutes stretched into what felt like hours, a seamless continuum of terror, fascination, and cognitive overload. Every attempt to anchor himself, to move, to scream, to rationalize, was met with resistance from the oppressive weight of paralysis and the subtle manipulations of the entities. He experienced what can only be described as a hyperreality, an altered state where the senses were both heightened and distorted. Shadows moved independently, textures shimmered unnaturally, and the familiar contours of his room bent and shifted in ways that suggested an underlying intelligence at work, calculating and precise, yet alien in purpose. As suddenly as the visitation began, it ended. The entities retreated to the edges of the pulsing light, which dimmed and folded into itself, leaving the room seemingly unchanged yet profoundly altered in its atmosphere. Mark could finally move again, though his limbs trembled uncontrollably. He sat upright in bed, his breath ragged, every sense on high alert. A cold sweat coated his skin, and the lingering metallic scent of the room reminded him that what had occurred was not a dream. The aftereffects were immediate. The hum in his ears persisted, the tingling sensation in his limbs remained, and faint, unusual marks were visible on his wrists and neck, small, circular impressions that could not be accounted for by any mundane cause. In the days that followed, Mark experienced persistent gaps in memory. Portions of the night remained opaque, fragments surfacing in flashes of disjointed imagery. He found himself unable to reconstruct the sequence of events coherently, yet the emotional residue, the fear, the awe, the helplessness, remained vivid and inescapable. Nightmares recurred, echoing the shapes, lights, and sensations of the visitation, each dream slightly different yet following a recognizable pattern of intrusion, examination, and departure. Sleep became a battleground between his desire for rest and the subconscious anticipation of recurrence, a tension that left him chronically fatigued and hypervigilant. Even the mundane aspects of daily life were affected. Mark reported heightened sensitivity to light and sound, subtle tremors in his hands, and occasional disorientation that could not be explained medically. The psychological impact was profound. Hyperawareness, anxiety attacks, and a deep-seated mistrust of his own perceptions created an ongoing struggle to distinguish reality from the echoes of the visitation. Social relationships were strained, as he hesitated to share his experience with friends and family, anticipating disbelief or ridicule. The combination of fear, memory fragmentation, and physical markers created a persistent reminder that the entities had not only intruded into his personal space, but had left an enduring imprint on his consciousness. The increasing boldness of the entities became apparent as he began to piece together his experience. Unlike the first visit, which had been meticulous and controlled, these beings had exhibited a growing assertiveness, manipulating the room itself, extending their influence beyond mere observation, and actively engaging with the environment in ways that suggested an expanding confidence in their presence. The subtle hints of future intrusion, combined with the intensity of the encounter, indicated that subsequent visitations could be even more invasive and unrestrained, setting the stage for experiences that would further challenge the limits of comprehension and endurance. One of the most striking and unsettling aspects reported by abductees is not merely the physical presence of the entities, but the way they communicate. Unlike human interaction, which depends on spoken language, gestures, and shared symbols, the communication during bedroom visitations is often described as direct, internal, and almost instantaneous. Abductees recount receiving complex ideas, vivid images, or even fully formed sentences without a single sound being uttered. This mode of interaction, commonly referred to as telepathy, creates an immediate and unfiltered connection between the entities and the human mind, bypassing the barriers of speech or translation. Yet, despite its immediacy, this communication is rarely clear-cut. It is filled with strange emotional undercurrents, ambiguous symbols, and impressions that seem simultaneously foreign and familiar, as though the messages originate from a source beyond human comprehension but are tailored to resonate within it. The telepathic messages themselves are as varied as the experiences of the abductees. Some report receiving warnings, cryptic advisories about environmental disaster, war, or human self-destruction, presented not as verbal pronouncements but as overwhelming feelings, flashes of catastrophic imagery, or wordless urgency. Others describe messages of a more intimate nature, reassurances of safety, encouragement to remain calm, or subtle suggestions that the events are part of a greater plan. These communications can evoke contradictory emotions. Even messages intended as comforting often carry an undertone of control, leaving the abductee feeling both soothed and disoriented. In some cases, the telepathic flow seems one-sided, with the entity imposing thoughts or images without inviting response. In others, there is an exchange, albeit an uneven one, in which the abductee's own thoughts and fears seem to echo back, transformed and reflected in alien patterns that resist interpretation. The effect of such direct mental contact is profound. Abductees frequently describe feeling as though their minds have been laid bare, every memory, fear, and hidden thought exposed to an intelligence far beyond their own. This sense of intrusion is often cited as more disturbing than the physical aspects of the abduction. Even in the absence of overt threat, the idea that an outside force can access one's most private inner world undermines the very foundation of personal autonomy. At the same time, some abductees report experiencing a paradoxical sense of understanding or connection during these exchanges, as if they are momentarily aligned with a consciousness vastly larger than their own. This blend of vulnerability and awe deepens the mystery of the phenomenon, suggesting motives that are neither purely benevolent nor overtly malicious, but something far more complex. Physical gestures and visual symbols occasionally supplement or replace telepathic communication. Abductees describe entities making deliberate hand or arm movements, often slow and precise, which seem to correspond with shifts in the mental impressions they receive. Sometimes these gestures are accompanied by projected images, geometric patterns, swirling lights, or symbols that appear either in the air or directly in the abductee's mind. The symbols themselves are rarely understood, but many describe them as intricate, mathematical, or reminiscent of an unknown language. In a few cases, abductees claim to have been shown entire sequences of symbols like a scroll or code, each one burning into their memory even as they fail to decipher its meaning. These visual elements reinforce the idea that alien communication is multi-layered, blending thought, image, and movement into a form of expression far removed from human norms. Another common theme is the sense of receiving mental instructions or directives during the experience. These instructions are not always explicit. Sometimes they manifest as a powerful compulsion to act or think in a certain way after the visitation has ended. For example, an abductee might awaken with an unshakable urge to draw a specific symbol, write down a sequence of numbers, or avoid a particular location without understanding why. Others describe being told to remember certain details while forgetting others, or feeling that their thoughts are being subtly guided even after the encounter. This element of hypnotic suggestion blurs the line between communication and control, raising questions about whether the entities are merely exchanging information or actively shaping human behavior. These methods of communication often extend beyond the abduction event itself, infiltrating the abductee's sleep and waking life. Many report vivid dreams in the days or weeks following a visitation, dreams that feel more like experiences than imagination. In these dreams, the entities may appear again, reinforcing earlier messages or introducing new ones. Some abductees describe an ongoing relationship, conducted entirely through dreams, with recurring scenarios and dialogues that feel as real as waking life. This connection between alien communication and sleep phenomena adds yet another layer of complexity, intertwining the mechanics of the human subconscious with an external intelligence that seems to exploit its vulnerabilities. The blending of dreams and conscious experience often leads to a heightened state of sensitivity, where abductees feel as though they are receiving signals or impressions even while awake. A sudden thought, an image flashing behind closed eyes, or a wave of inexplicable emotion may be interpreted as a continuation of the telepathic link established during the visitation. Whether these experiences are genuine transmissions or the psychological aftershocks of trauma remains an open question, but for the abductees, the effect is the same: a persistent sense of being watched, guided, or influenced by an unseen presence. This ongoing mental connection can be both destabilizing and strangely compelling, creating an enduring tie between the abductee and the entities that transcends physical space and time. The mystery deepens when examining how these methods of communication align with recurring sleep phenomena. Traditional sleep disorders such as night terrors or hypnagogic hallucinations involve vivid sensory experiences, paralysis, and powerful emotional responses, all features mirrored in alien abduction narratives. However, abductees insist that their experiences are not confined to sleep states. They occur in full consciousness or leave behind physical evidence, making it difficult to dismiss them as purely neurological events. The overlap between telepathic communication and altered states of consciousness suggests that the entities may deliberately exploit these liminal moments, those thresholds between waking and dreaming, when the human mind is most suggestible, its boundaries most permeable. Even with all these reports, the entity's motives remain shrouded in uncertainty. The telepathic messages, the symbols, the hypnotic suggestions, none of them reveal a clear agenda. Warnings about global catastrophe coexist with intimate reassurances, cryptic codes with gestures of apparent empathy. The very ambiguity of the communication may be intentional, a way of controlling the narrative while preventing complete understanding. Or it may reflect an intelligence so fundamentally different from our own that its methods and purposes simply cannot be passed in human terms. Whatever the case, the abductees are left with the same lingering question: why? Why choose this mode of interaction, and why select individuals at their most vulnerable, in the privacy of their own bedrooms? This uncertainty sets the stage for the next layer of the phenomenon, the escalation of both the entity's methods and their objectives. As abductees begin to recognize patterns in the communication, they also note an increase in its intensity and scope. Messages become more forceful, symbols more intricate, and the sense of control more pronounced. The shift suggests a growing boldness or urgency on the part of the entities, hinting that what begins as a cryptic mental exchange may evolve into something far more invasive and transformative. It began on a calm, late spring evening in a suburban neighborhood, the kind of quiet that feels almost too perfect. The Harrison family, David and Clara, along with their 2 children, 12-year-old Emily and 7-year-old Max, were settling in for the night. Their modest home was filled with the soft murmur of fans, the ticking of a wall clock, and the occasional rustle of leaves brushing against the windows. The family had always considered their bedrooms private sanctuaries, spaces where security and routine provided comfort. That night, however, would transform those familiar rooms into a stage for an experience none of them could have anticipated, one that would leave an indelible mark on their collective memory. The first signs of disturbance were subtle, almost imperceptible. David, sleeping near the window, awoke to a faint, cold draught despite the glass being firmly closed. A strange luminescence filled the room, shifting across the walls in hues that defied natural explanation, pale blues and greens that pulsed rhythmically, as though in sync with some hidden heartbeat. At the same time, Clara felt her body grow heavy and immobile, an unseen force pressing down with a weight both oppressive and ethereal. She attempted to call out, but the sound caught in her throat. The children, Emily and Max, began to stir simultaneously, though neither seemed fully awake, their eyes wide with a fear that was both instinctive and preternatural. Then the entities appeared. Unlike the previous individual abductions, this visitation involved multiple figures that seemed to acknowledge the presence of all 4 family members at once. Their forms were variable, some small and grey, with the familiar almond-shaped eyes, and others taller, their bodies elongated and semi-transparent, almost blending into the light that now filled the room. One hovered directly over Emily, its delicate, spindly fingers extending toward her without touching. Max, on the other side of the room, reacted differently. He squirmed, tried to vocalize a protest, and even attempted to flee, though invisible barriers seemed to contain his movement. David and Clara, immobilized in tandem, could only observe, their terror amplified by the simultaneous vulnerability of their children. The entity's actions were deliberate and synchronized. One of the taller beings moved slowly between the beds, extending an appendage toward each person in turn. The sensation was not painful but intrusive, a weightless pressure combined with a tingling that spread across nerves as if probing the very essence of their physical and mental selves. The experience was profoundly different for the children. Emily, more perceptive and unusually calm, described seeing tiny lights spinning in patterns, sensations that mirrored the geometric symbols reported in other abduction narratives. Max, on the other hand, seemed terrified by shapes and shadows that only he could perceive, suggesting that the visitation could interact differently with individual consciousness depending on age or cognitive development. David and Clara felt an uncanny resonance, a sense that the beings were exploring their thoughts and emotions collectively, as though scanning not just individuals but the intricate network of relationships that bound the family together. Shared hallucinations and distortions of time became evident almost immediately. The family later recalled that clocks, wall ornaments, and even the ceiling itself seemed to fluctuate subtly in size and orientation, creating a perception that space was bending around them. Emily described the sensation of floating through the ceiling, while Max insisted the walls were breathing. David experienced a disorienting merging of moments, memories from earlier that day and imagined sequences blending indistinguishably with what was happening. Clara reported that the sounds in the room, from the fan to the ticking clock, seemed delayed and distorted, creating an echo that made it impossible to tell what was real. When the entities finally withdrew, the family realized that significant periods of time were missing. While they estimated the encounter to have lasted only minutes, more than an hour had passed, a gap in consciousness that none could explain. Physical traces and anomalies provided further evidence that the visitation had occurred. Small, circular marks appeared on the children's wrists and ankles, identical to those reported by countless previous abductees. David and Clara noticed faint depressions in their mattresses, areas where the fabric seemed slightly compressed in unusual patterns. The air itself carried a residual metallic scent that lingered for days, and some electronic devices in the room behaved erratically, switching on and off without cause. A lamp in the corner of the room had a crack in its glass, though no one had physically disturbed it, and minor scratches were found on the wooden floorboards near Emily's bed, consistent with the movement of an unseen presence. These subtle physical markers reinforced the family's belief that the visitation was not a dream or shared hallucination, but an intrusion that had tangible effects on their environment. Emotional and psychological reactions varied between family members. David and Clara experienced lingering anxiety, hypervigilance, and recurring dreams in which the entities returned, replaying the night with variations that seemed designed to probe memory and emotion. Emily, though initially frightened, displayed an unusual curiosity, describing vivid dream sequences in which she spoke with the beings and received images she could not fully comprehend. Max's responses were more visceral. Nightmares, bedwetting, and an acute fear of darkness persisted for weeks. The divergence in reactions highlights a recurring pattern observed in other multi-witness abductions. The psychological impact is profoundly influenced by age, cognitive development, and individual temperament. Perhaps most perplexing was the apparent telepathic communication during the event. Clara later reported a sensation of receiving emotional instructions rather than words, feelings that suggested calm and compliance rather than fear, as though the entities were guiding behavior without direct verbal exchange. David, meanwhile, felt images projected into his mind, landscapes of unfamiliar worlds, abstract symbols, and sequences of events that seemed to encode messages he could not interpret. Emily described sequences of glowing geometric shapes that unfolded like a story in her imagination, while Max only sensed waves of fear and urgency. The variability in perception among the family members emphasizes the complexity of alien communication methods, hinting at an intelligence capable of interacting with multiple consciousnesses simultaneously, tailoring the experience to each mind while maintaining a coherent overarching pattern. The aftermath of the visitation left the family grappling with both immediate and long-term consequences. Memory gaps persisted, particularly for the parents, who struggled to reconstruct the sequence of events. Sleep disturbances were pronounced, nightmares recurred nightly, and even when dreams did not reference the visitation explicitly, residual anxiety disrupted the normal cycle of rest. Physical traces, the faint marks on skin, compressed bedding, and subtle environmental anomalies, remained, serving as tangible reminders of the intrusion. Behavioral changes were also observed. Increased vigilance, heightened sensitivity to light and sound, and a pervasive wariness of nightfall became part of daily life. These after-effects underscore the profound impact that shared abductions can have, particularly when multiple consciousnesses are engaged simultaneously. The collective nature of this visitation adds a unique dimension to the phenomenon. Unlike isolated cases, where the abductee experiences the event alone, a multi-witness encounter creates shared memories, intersecting perceptions, and even subtle synchronizations of emotion and thought. The Harrison family's experience demonstrates that such events are capable of transcending individual subjectivity, embedding themselves into the network of relationships and influencing not only personal consciousness but also the dynamic between family members. Shared hallucinations, simultaneous sensations, and coordinated responses suggest an intentionality behind the visitation that is more sophisticated than mere observation, implying an intelligence capable of understanding and interacting with complex social structures. The increasing complexity of these abductions naturally leads to scientific and skeptical perspectives. While first-hand accounts provide vivid, detailed narratives, researchers and psychologists often question the objective reality of the events. Explanations range from sleep disorders, such as night terrors and hypnagogic hallucinations, to dissociative states triggered by stress or trauma. Yet, the consistency of patterns across cultures, ages, and social contexts challenges purely psychological interpretations. Physical traces, coordinated multi-witness experiences, and telepathic-like communications remain difficult to reconcile with conventional science, leaving both believers and skeptics grappling with the enigmatic nature of these phenomena. The Harrison family's experience, with its combination of multiple witnesses, tangible traces, and profound psychological impact, serves as a bridge between anecdotal accounts and attempts at systematic investigation. It raises essential questions about the boundaries of consciousness, the interplay between subjective perception and objective reality, and the possibility of intelligent entities capable of interacting with human minds in ways that remain fundamentally mysterious. This shared bedroom visitation sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the scientific, skeptical, and theoretical frameworks that attempt to explain, or challenge, the extraordinary claims made by abductees. While the narratives of abductees are vivid, consistent, and often deeply compelling, the scientific and skeptical communities have long sought to understand these experiences through alternative explanations. One of the most frequently cited phenomena is sleep paralysis, a condition in which a person, often just as they are falling asleep or waking, experiences temporary immobility while remaining consciously aware. During sleep paralysis, Many report a sensation of pressure on the chest, an inability to move, and the perception of an external presence. These characteristics closely mirror the early stages of many reported bedroom visitations, where abductees describe being pinned to their beds while sensing entities hovering nearby. The phenomenon is rooted in the natural process of REM sleep, during which the brain temporarily inhibits motor function to prevent the body from acting out dreams. However, when consciousness partially intrudes, the result can be terrifying. The sensation of an intruder, intense fear, and even hallucinations of figures or lights. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. Hallucinations occurring at the boundary between wakefulness and sleep also provide a plausible framework for interpreting some abduction experiences. During these transitions, the brain can generate vivid sensory imagery, visual flashes of light, shadows, or distorted shapes, alongside auditory perceptions such as humming, buzzing, or mechanical sounds. Combined with sleep paralysis, these hallucinations can create an experience that feels entirely real. For some skeptics, the combination of physiological sleep phenomena, emotional arousal, and stress may explain the core components of bedroom visitations without invoking extraterrestrial involvement. False memory and suggestion offer another layer of explanation, particularly in cases where individuals undergo regression therapy or hypnotic recall. Under certain conditions, the human mind is remarkably susceptible to constructing memories that feel authentic, even when they are partially or entirely fabricated. This can occur unconsciously, with the brain filling gaps in memory with plausible, but imagined details, often influenced by cultural narratives, media, or previous exposure to other abduction reports. For example, an individual may remember being levitated, examined, or touched by entities, even if no external stimuli occurred. Trauma and stress can further amplify this process, creating a feedback loop in which fear and suggestion reinforce the memory's perceived accuracy. Psychologists caution that such mechanisms do not invalidate the subjective experience of the abductee. Rather, they offer an alternative framework for understanding how the mind can generate intensely realistic and emotionally charged recollections. Trauma and psychological vulnerability play an important role in these interpretations. Individuals under chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or experiencing anxiety are more likely to report unusual experiences during periods of sleep or relaxation. In these states, the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes permeable, increasing the likelihood of vivid hallucinations, fragmented memory, and emotional flooding. Trauma, particularly in childhood, may further sensitize the mind to experiences of helplessness, heightening both the intensity and memorability of sleep-related phenomena. Skeptics argue that the combination of physiological, psychological, and cultural factors can account for many of the standard elements of bedroom abductions: paralysis, strange lights, imagined beings, and fragmented time perception. Yet, despite these explanations, some aspects of reported abductions remain difficult to reconcile with conventional science. Multiple witness accounts, particularly when family members or roommates independently report consistent observations, challenge simple attribution to hallucinations or false memory. Physical traces, unexplained bruises, circular marks, residual electromagnetic disturbances, or anomalous readings on electronic devices raise questions that are not easily dismissed by psychological theories alone. Moreover, abductees often report complex, recurring experiences that span years, sometimes accompanied by telepathic-like communication, shared dreams, or awareness of events occurring beyond the immediate physical environment. While skeptics may argue for psychological or environmental factors, these repeated, cross-verified experiences pose challenges to purely reductionist explanations. Another difficulty for purely skeptical frameworks is the apparent consistency across cultures, demographics, and generations. Abduction reports from multiple countries share strikingly similar details: small humanoid figures with large eyes, examination procedures, paralysis, bright lights, and sudden gaps in memory. While media exposure and cultural diffusion may explain some commonalities, The persistence of these patterns over decades and across regions where media influence is minimal remains puzzling. Skeptics acknowledge that these consistencies may suggest underlying psychological archetypes, yet they also admit that they cannot fully account for the physical anomalies or the sense of direct, real-time presence experienced by abductees. It is important to emphasize that skepticism does not seek to demean or dismiss the experiences of individuals who report abductions. Rather, it provides a framework for understanding, testing, and contextualizing these extraordinary claims in light of known physiological and psychological processes. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, suggestion, and trauma offer plausible explanations for many aspects of bedroom visitations, and in some cases, likely account for the bulk of reported experiences. Nonetheless, the fact that certain phenomena, shared experiences, recurring patterns, physical traces, and telepathic-like impressions remain resistant to conventional explanation underscores the complexity of the phenomenon and the limits of current scientific understanding. Even among skeptics, there is acknowledgement that some cases are more challenging to rationalize than others. Abductions involving multiple witnesses, unusual environmental anomalies, or corroborated physical evidence push the boundaries of standard interpretations. In these instances, researchers often adopt a cautious stance, recognizing the validity of the subjective experience while remaining agnostic about the source. The persistence of unresolved cases, combined with the profound psychological impact on abductees, creates a compelling incentive for continued study and documentation. This tension between plausible psychological explanations and anomalous evidence forms a bridge between scientific inquiry and first-hand narratives, allowing both approaches to coexist without dismissing the experiences of those involved. Ultimately, skeptical perspectives provide a critical lens through which to examine the phenomenon, offering alternative explanations and encouraging careful investigation. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, false memory, and trauma each contribute to a nuanced understanding of why bedroom abductions are reported so consistently and vividly. At the same time, they leave room for questions that remain unanswered, especially regarding shared experiences, persistent physical traces, and complex communication reported by abductees. The acknowledgement of these unresolved elements prepares the ground for returning to first-hand accounts, reinforcing their credibility while maintaining a critical awareness of human cognition and perception. By exploring both skepticism and anecdotal testimony, we gain a more complete perspective, one that respects the depth of personal experience while situating it within the broader landscape of scientific inquiry. It was just past 2 in the morning when Marcus, a 28-year-old software engineer living in a small, dimly lit apartment, awoke to a sensation he could not immediately identify. The familiar scent of his room, old books, faint coffee aroma, and the lingering notes of lavender from an air freshener, was punctuated by an almost metallic tang, sharp and unsettling. The darkness felt unnatural, heavy, as if the shadows themselves had thickened. His eyes, still adjusting, caught flickers of movement across the walls, subtle but undeniably deliberate. The digital clock on his bedside table displayed 2:03 a.m., though he had no recollection of the exact moment he fell asleep. The initial awareness was accompanied by a sensation that has become all too familiar in abduction narratives, an intense immobility. His body was frozen, every muscle unresponsive, as if the bed itself had become an extension of some external force holding him in place. At first, Marcus thought he was experiencing the familiar onset of sleep paralysis. But this was different. The sensation of paralysis was accompanied by a low-frequency hum, vibrating through the room and seeming to resonate within his chest. Then came the light, a diffuse, bluish glow, hovering at ceiling height, casting long, twisting shadows that distorted the familiar outlines of his furniture. The glow intensified, revealing forms within it, tall, thin figures, moving with deliberate, almost mechanical precision. Their presence was immediate, undeniable, and simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. The figures did not speak in words. Instead, consciousness itself seemed to bend around their presence, impressions and emotions being transmitted directly into Marcus' mind. Fear, curiosity, and a strange, compelling fascination overwhelmed him simultaneously. The entity's approach was methodical. One hovered above him, its elongated limbs moving in slow, fluid motions, while another positioned itself near the edge of the bed, extending delicate appendages that emitted soft pulses of light. These appendages seemed to function like sensory probes, interacting with Marcus in a manner that was simultaneously invasive and precise. The sensation was neither painful nor entirely pleasant. Rather, it was as though each probe scanned and mapped his body and consciousness, imprinting a detailed record while leaving him aware but powerless. Marcus felt the hairs on his arms stand on end, his heart hammering with a mixture of terror and awe. Every breath was shallow, caught in a mixture of anticipation and fear, yet he could not look away, unable to release his focus from the beings before him. The examination intensified as Marcus noticed devices suspended in midair around the room, bathed in the same bluish glow as the figures themselves. The devices were small, geometric constructs that emitted beams of light or subtle vibrations, each moving independently yet seemingly coordinated. One approached his chest, projecting a lattice-like pattern that wrapped around his torso in shifting geometric shapes. The pattern expanded and contracted rhythmically, scanning in a way that was almost surgical in precision. He felt a mild tingling, not painful but undeniable, as though the device was mapping his physiological responses while simultaneously interfacing with his nervous system. Marcus realized that this interaction extended beyond the physical. The lattice seemed to penetrate his consciousness as well, stirring memories, emotions, and thoughts with a clarity that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. The entities communicated indirectly through these devices, not with words but with impressions and patterns that unfolded in Marcus' mind. Complex sequences of light and motion conveyed abstract ideas, shapes resembling spirals, grids, and interconnected nodes, each accompanied by emotional undertones ranging from calm reassurance to urgent warning. Marcus struggled to interpret these impressions, attempting to match the alien constructs to familiar concepts. Occasionally, he perceived flashes of distant landscapes, machinery, or what appeared to be interior spaces of a ship or structure, though their logic and geometry were alien, often defying conventional spatial understanding. The effect was disorienting. His mind oscillated between panic and awe, fear and curiosity, creating a state of heightened sensory and emotional awareness that left him both overwhelmed and deeply attuned to the visitation. Physical interaction continued in subtle but undeniable ways. Marcus felt his limbs being lifted and adjusted without resistance, as though the entities were manipulating him through an invisible force. One device traced faint lines along his arms, leaving behind small, almost imperceptible marks, while another emitted pulses of energy across his chest that caused a tingling warmth. Every sensation was precise, as though calibrated to elicit maximum awareness without causing harm, reinforcing a sense of meticulous observation. His body, though immobile, became a medium for this intricate interaction, every nerve ending alert to the foreign stimuli. Despite his terror, a part of him could not help but marvel at the intelligence and technology on display, recognizing a level of sophistication and control that far surpassed human capabilities. Marcus' emotional and psychological state oscillated wildly throughout the encounter. Fear was pervasive, intensified by the inability to move, the alien shapes, and the unfamiliar sensory input. Yet, a competing fascination emerged. He was witnessing phenomena that were both incomprehensible and extraordinary, as if he had been given a brief window into a realm entirely outside human perception. The entities appeared to respond to his internal state, modulating their actions and the intensity of the device's effects in accordance with his reactions. This interaction created a feedback loop of emotion and perception, in which his terror heightened their apparent precision, which in turn deepened his awe and fear. Even after the encounter ended, the emotional residue lingered. Intense fatigue, heightened alertness, and recurring flashbacks in dreams that mirrored the examination in striking detail. The visitation left tangible traces as well. After the entities withdrew, Marcus noticed faint circular indentations on his wrists and forearms, subtle abrasions that were not present before sleep. The lattice patterns projected by the devices seemed to have left residual impressions, almost like delicate burns or patterned bruises, which faded only gradually over the next few days. His digital clock and several electronics in the room malfunctioned. Screens flickered, lights dimmed inexplicably, and a low hum persisted in devices that had previously been silent. Even the air carried an unusual metallic scent that persisted for hours, a lingering sensory reminder of the encounter. The room itself, though unchanged in structure, felt irrevocably altered, imbued with a memory of presence and activity that Marcus could neither deny nor rationalize fully. Throughout the event, Marcus experienced a profound sense of temporal distortion. What he perceived as a continuous sequence, spanning what felt like an hour or more, later proved to have lasted less than 20 minutes. Time during the visitation was fluid, bending to the entity's apparent control, further heightening the surreal nature of the encounter. His awareness of his own body, the room, and the devices became simultaneously acute and diffuse, creating a sense of being fully present yet partially removed from reality, as if he were both observer and subject within the same experience. The visitation ended as abruptly as it had begun. The bluish light collapsed inward, devices suspended in midair vanished, and the figures receded to the edges of Marcus' consciousness. The paralysis lifted, leaving him gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, and profoundly shaken. Yet despite the terror, a part of him remained fixated on the technology, the precision, and the intelligence displayed, fascinated by the way his body and mind had been mapped and explored. The combination of fear, helplessness, and awe created an emotional complexity that would linger for weeks, surfacing in dreams, waking flashbacks, and subtle physiological responses. Increased heart rate, muscle tension, and heightened sensory awareness during periods of quiet or darkness. The aftermath also reinforced a central theme in many abduction reports: the meticulousness and purposefulness of the encounter. Devices, lights, and probes appeared calibrated to elicit specific responses, both physical and psychological. The entity's methods suggested an ongoing agenda, whether observational, experimental, or communicative, though the ultimate motives remained opaque. Marcus' detailed recollections, combined with the physical markers and electronic anomalies, lent the event a credibility that demanded careful consideration. These experiences became a focal point for investigation by both researchers and independent experts, who documented the encounter meticulously, noting its alignment with other reported abduction phenomena while exploring possible intersections with human physiology, psychology, and environmental variables. For many abductees, the horror of a single encounter is only the beginning. Night after night, weeks, months, or even years later, the intrusions return, often following a predictable yet incomprehensible rhythm. These recurring nocturnal visitations are marked not only by their frequency, but also by their timing, duration, and subtle relationship to the body's natural sleep cycles. Abductees consistently report that incidents tend to occur in the early hours of the morning, often between 1 and 3 a.m., coinciding with the deepest phases of REM sleep. During these periods, the brain exhibits heightened activity, particularly in regions associated with vivid dreaming, memory consolidation, and emotional processing. Yet unlike ordinary dreams, the experiences of abductees are overwhelmingly tangible. Sensations of weight, paralysis, pressure, and presence intrude on the mind with a realism that defies conventional sleep phenomena. Duration is another variable that both fascinates and terrifies those affected. While abductees may perceive a visitation as lasting several hours, objective measurement, when available, often suggests a far shorter interval. Time appears to stretch and compress during these events, a distortion that many describe as disorienting and anxiety-inducing. Some report that the subjective passage of time is inversely proportional to the intensity of the experience. The more invasive and complex the visitation, the longer it seems to last in consciousness. In extreme cases, individuals awake feeling as though they have been trapped for a full night, only to discover that clocks and devices indicate mere minutes have elapsed. This temporal dissonance creates lingering psychological effects, reinforcing the sense that the abductee is outside the normal flow of reality during the intrusion. Frequency, too, follows curious patterns. Certain individuals experience nightly events for consecutive weeks, followed by prolonged periods of absence. Others report cyclical visitation patterns, linked either to lunar phases, personal milestones, or other environmental factors they cannot fully articulate. While these patterns are anecdotal, the consistency across different abductees suggests that recurring visitations are not random. Instead, there appears to be an underlying structure, a rhythm or schedule that is observable if not yet understood scientifically. For the abductee, this repetition compounds stress, sleep deprivation, and anxiety, gradually eroding the sense of security traditionally associated with one's bedroom, the very space where humans are most vulnerable. The connection between these patterns and REM sleep is particularly striking. During REM, the body is paralyzed, a mechanism that prevents us from physically acting out dreams. Yet in the case of nocturnal visitations, abductees often report experiencing an exaggerated form of this paralysis, complete immobility paired with a vivid perception of external entities manipulating their environment. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, occurring at the thresholds of sleep and waking, appear to provide the perfect window for these phenomena to occur. The overlap between normal sleep mechanics and abduction events suggests that the entities, if indeed external, may exploit these natural vulnerabilities, timing their appearances to coincide with moments when the mind is most receptive, the body least able to resist, and the consciousness most fluid. Personal testimonies illuminate the profound psychological and sensory impact of recurring nocturnal events. Sarah, a 35-year-old nurse, described being awakened every third night by the sensation of a presence hovering at the foot of the bed. She experienced both the immobilization characteristic of sleep paralysis and an intense awareness of entities examining her body. The episodes lasted, in her perception, up to 2 hours, though the digital clock on her bedside table indicated mere minutes had passed. Similarly, Peter, a college student, reported nightly visitations over a span of several months, each accompanied by recurring images of geometric lights projected across the room, the soft humming of unseen machinery, and a pervasive sense of observation. Both individuals reported a cumulative effect: chronic fatigue, heightened sensitivity to light and sound, and persistent anxiety around bedtime. Interestingly, the experiences of children often differ from adults, yet share essential elements. Emily, aged 11, recounted nightly encounters in which small, luminous beings hovered near her bed, sometimes interacting with her toys or projecting abstract patterns onto the ceiling. Max, her younger brother, experienced vivid feelings of pressure and touch, but interpreted them as shapes and motions in the shadows rather than fully articulated figures. These accounts highlight that while perception differs with age and cognitive development, the core experience, presence, immobility, and observation, remains remarkably consistent. Such cross-generational similarities provide important data points for understanding the phenomenon, emphasizing that the timing and patterns of visitation are not purely subjective but follow recognizable trends. Sleep disruption is another hallmark of nightly visitations. Abductees frequently report fragmented sleep, difficulty achieving restful REM cycles, and persistent sleep-onset anxiety. Even when no entities are present, the mind anticipates intrusion, producing heightened arousal, rapid heartbeat, and shallow breathing. Over time, this pattern can exacerbate stress and weaken the body's natural defenses, creating a feedback loop in which sleep itself becomes a trigger for physiological and psychological vulnerability. In some cases, the anticipation of visitations can induce spontaneous hypnagogic hallucinations, dreams that mimic prior experiences with startling realism, blurring the line between reality and imagination. Recurring incidents often leave subtle physical traces, further reinforcing the tangible nature of the events. Abductees described faint circular marks on wrists, forearms, or shoulders, impressions in bedding, and residual warmth or tingling in areas the entities have apparently contacted. While not every nightly visit results in physical evidence, the repeated association between sleep disruption, subjective intrusion, and minor physiological markers strengthens the argument that these events, whatever their source, involve more than mere imagination. The consistency of such traces across diverse reports hints at a systematic methodology, suggesting that the entities, if they exist, operate with precision and intent. Despite the alarming regularity of these visitations, some abductees report developing coping strategies or rituals to mitigate their impact. These can include environmental modifications, such as leaving lights on, arranging furniture in specific ways, or using devices to monitor the room. Others employ mental techniques, visualization, meditation, or even deliberately attempting to wake up during an episode. While effectiveness varies, the existence of such strategies underscores the abductee's recognition of patterns and rhythms, revealing an adaptive engagement with recurring nocturnal phenomena rather than passive victimhood. The cumulative effect of nightly visitations is profound. Chronic sleep deprivation, anxiety, and altered perception create long-term challenges for abductees. Yet the persistence of the pattern also provides valuable insight. By examining timing, duration, frequency, and associated sleep mechanisms, researchers can begin to identify structural consistencies across cases. These consistencies, in turn, provide a bridge to more formal investigations, including monitoring by sleep laboratories, interviews, and collection of physiological data. Such research aims to correlate subjective experience with measurable phenomena, offering a pathway to understanding, if not yet fully explaining, the recurring nocturnal events. This connection between personal experience and systematic observation naturally leads to discussions of governmental and independent research efforts. Recurring sleep patterns, tangible traces, and consistent phenomenological details provide a framework through which experts, both skeptical and investigative, can approach the phenomenon with scientific rigor. By acknowledging the interplay between sleep mechanics, psychological susceptibility, and external observation, the investigation moves from anecdote to study, while still honoring the deeply personal and often terrifying nature of each nocturnal visitation. The stage is thus set to examine what official documentation, declassified files, and research initiatives reveal about the broader implications of these recurring experiences. Over the decades, the recurring reports of alien abductions, particularly bedroom visitations, have captured the attention not only of individual researchers but, allegedly, of government authorities as well. While official acknowledgement has historically been limited and often cryptic, declassified documents suggest that interest in unexplained aerial phenomena and associated human experiences has been long-standing. Project Blue Book, the United States Air Force initiative that investigated UFO reports from 1952 to 1969, included numerous cases that hinted at abduction-like elements, though such incidents were often downplayed or categorized as inconclusive. In certain files, witness testimonies described missing time, unusual lights, and sensations of being physically restrained, details that bear striking resemblance to modern abduction narratives. While Blue Book primarily focused on aerial sightings rather than bedroom intrusions, the recurring overlap between anomalous craft sightings and personal encounter reports suggests a continuity of interest in phenomena that defy conventional explanation. In addition to government archives, credible scientists and researchers have undertaken methodical studies of alleged abduction experiences. Dr. John E. Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist, famously conducted extensive interviews with individuals claiming repeated abductions. His findings, documented in published works and lectures, emphasize the psychological and physiological impact of these experiences, while acknowledging their consistency across cultural and geographic contexts. Mack's approach was distinctive. He treated the abductees' accounts with seriousness and curiosity, neither dismissing them as delusional nor presuming their literal truth. Through in-depth interviews, hypnotic regressions, and longitudinal observation, He documented patterns that paralleled the sleep-related phenomena, physical traces, and telepathic impressions described by countless abductees. Mack's work, while controversial, exemplifies the bridge between personal testimony and systematic investigation, highlighting the persistent challenge of interpreting experiences that straddle the line between psychology and potential external reality. Similarly, Bud Hopkins, an artist-turned-researcher, collected hundreds of abduction accounts through interviews, hypnosis sessions, and collaborative analysis. Hopkins' investigations placed particular emphasis on recurring physical evidence, unexplained scars, burns, and implant-like anomalies reported by abductees. While skeptics argue for psychosomatic or self-generated explanations, Hopkins maintained that the consistency and specificity of certain patterns, particularly across unrelated individuals, defy easy dismissal. His work also noted the increasing boldness of reported entities over time, from subtle bedroom intrusions to complex interactions involving devices, telepathic messages, and coordinated manipulations of multiple witnesses. The convergence of these accounts with other researchers' findings, including physiological anomalies and recurring time distortions, has fueled speculation that the phenomenon may possess an intelligence-driven component. Government involvement in such research, both overt and covert, has often been the subject of speculation and conspiracy theories. Some abductees report that authorities, military or civilian, have taken an active interest in their experiences, occasionally questioning them in detail about sightings, missing time, or physical traces. Declassified documents occasionally corroborate this, revealing investigative threads that extend beyond aerial sightings to human interactions. While most official materials stop short of explicitly acknowledging extraterrestrial presence, repeated references to unexplained phenomena, unexplored biological evidence, and unusual electromagnetic readings hint at a sustained interest. Some whistleblowers have claimed that information has been withheld from the public, while certain files remain heavily redacted, fueling speculation that authorities are deliberately controlling the narrative. Independent research organizations have also contributed to the systematic study of abductions. Groups such as the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, and the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, have collected reports, conducted interviews, and in some cases, monitored locations identified as hotspots for repeated activity. Their methods range from traditional data gathering to sleep studies and environmental monitoring. Patterns identified by these organizations frequently align with anecdotal testimony. Most encounters occur during early morning hours, involve elements of paralysis or immobilization, and are often accompanied by unusual lights or electronic anomalies. By combining statistical analysis with qualitative interviews, researchers aim to identify recurring structures, highlight consistencies, and ultimately understand whether abductions constitute a genuine external phenomenon, a psychological artifact, or some combination thereof. Censorship, suppression, and the withholding of information remain recurrent themes in abduction lore. Some abductees report being discouraged from sharing details publicly, encountering disbelief from authorities, and, in certain accounts, being subtly monitored. These experiences feed the perception of a deliberate effort to control public understanding, though direct evidence of coordinated suppression is limited. Nonetheless, historical patterns, ranging from heavily redacted documents to abrupt project closures like the termination of Project Blue Book, suggest that governmental response to anomalous phenomena has been cautious and sometimes secretive. The tension between public transparency and security, real or perceived, contributes to the mystique surrounding alien abductions and reinforces the sense that official narratives rarely align with personal testimony. Scientific investigation, when balanced with skepticism, provides further context. Sleep studies, psychological profiling, and neurophysiological research all illuminate potential mechanisms for at least some abduction experiences. Yet the very existence of physical traces, corroborated multi-witness encounters, and consistent telepathic or technological elements resists easy categorization. Researchers such as Mack and Hopkins emphasize that even if abductions are mediated by altered states of consciousness, they produce tangible consequences in both mind and body, warranting serious attention. This nuanced perspective acknowledges human vulnerability, cognitive susceptibility, and cultural influences while remaining open to phenomena that challenge conventional paradigms. The intersection of official investigation and personal testimony produces a complex picture. Abductees recount experiences that are vivid, emotionally charged, and often corroborated by physical or environmental anomalies. Governments document unexplained incidents and unusual readings. Independent researchers record, analyze, and validate recurring patterns. Together, these threads suggest that alien abductions cannot be entirely dismissed as purely subjective or imagined events. Yet, definitive proof of extraterrestrial involvement remains elusive. What emerges instead is a layered narrative, one in which psychological, physiological, and environmental factors interact with human consciousness, occasionally producing events of extraordinary intensity and lasting impact. This cumulative body of evidence sets the stage for the final, most harrowing account, illustrating the ultimate extremes of bedroom abductions. The prior sections have explored individual experiences, family encounters, recurring nocturnal patterns, and the involvement of authorities and researchers. Now, the narrative pivots to the most terrifying case, an account that combines prolonged paralysis, invasive physical examination, telepathic communication, and environmental anomalies to create an episode that epitomizes the fears and mysteries explored throughout the preceding investigations. By contextualizing the abduction within the broader spectrum of research and observation, this story underscores both the human vulnerability to extraordinary phenomena and the unresolved questions that continue to challenge scientists, skeptics, and witnesses alike. It was a quiet, rain-soaked night when Laura, a 32-year-old teacher, first noticed something unusual in her apartment. The rhythmic patter of raindrops against the windowpane normally offered her comfort, a gentle soundtrack to the slow drift toward sleep. That night, however, an underlying tension pervaded the air. The room seemed denser, darker, and heavier, as though the familiar shadows had thickened into tangible walls. She sensed the presence of something else before she even opened her eyes, an intuition, subtle yet undeniable, that her sanctuary had been breached. The digital clock beside her bed glowed 2:15 a.m., its red numerals cutting through the gloom. Her body felt unusually stiff, her limbs heavy in a way that defied normal fatigue. The initial intrusion was imperceptible at first. Laura experienced a faint tingling across her skin, an almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. A soft, humming resonance filled the room, low and vibrating at a frequency she could feel deep within her chest. The sensation was at once alien and intimate, like a signal meant specifically for her. As her awareness sharpened, she noticed the shifting of light, small ripples of iridescence dancing along the walls, shapes and patterns that defied normal geometry. Shadows elongated and twisted, objects appeared subtly displaced, and the familiar layout of her room seemed to bend, expanding in some areas while compressing in others. The very perception of space began to feel fluid, as if the room itself had become a vessel for forces beyond human comprehension. Then she saw them. The entities emerged from the periphery of her vision, materializing with a suddenness that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Their forms were tall, slender, and impossibly smooth, with pale, reflective skin that absorbed light and re-emitted it in a subtle, pulsing glow. Their heads were disproportionately large, eyes black and almond-shaped, absorbing and radiating an intelligence that Laura could feel pressing directly into her mind. The beings moved with a fluid precision, gliding silently across the room, their limbs articulating in ways that seemed biologically improbable, yet perfectly coherent within their own logic. One hovered above her torso, extending appendages that emitted faint pulses of light, scanning with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Others remained at the edges, observing, adjusting, and sometimes interacting with objects in the room. Books toppled from shelves without contact, shadows twisted unnaturally, and electronic devices flickered or emitted sudden bursts of static. The environment itself seemed to respond to their presence, as though her apartment had become a controlled laboratory designed to manipulate perception and consciousness. Laura's attempts to resist were immediate but futile. She tried to move her arms and legs, only to find them utterly unresponsive, as if her body had been severed from her own commands. Panic surged through her, a visceral, paralyzing fear that intensified the sense of helplessness. Her heart raced, yet each beat felt muted, absorbed by the heavy, humming resonance in the air. Thoughts collided in her mind, rationalizations, pleas, and desperate strategies to awaken from what she assumed must be a dream. But every mental effort met resistance. The entities seemed to anticipate her reactions, subtly adjusting their movements and the intensity of the pulses they projected. It was as if her very consciousness were being monitored, mapped, and modulated in real time. Fear and fascination merged into a singular, disorienting sensation, leaving her simultaneously terrified and enthralled. The manipulation of reality became increasingly surreal. One entity extended a slender, luminous probe toward her forehead, and the room responded as if in tandem. Walls rippled like water, ceiling fixtures shimmered with patterns of impossible geometry, and the air itself seemed to thrum with a pulsating light. Laura felt herself being lifted, not physically in the sense of weight, but in consciousness, as though her awareness were being separated from her body. Memories, both vivid and obscure, flickered across her mind in rapid succession. Scenes from childhood, forgotten conversations, moments of fear and joy, blurring together with the current experience. She perceived her bedroom as simultaneously familiar and utterly alien, a space where normal physical laws no longer applied. The sense of reality itself became unstable, producing a terror unlike anything she had known, the knowledge that her mind and environment were being manipulated, and that her own perceptions could not be trusted. Communication, when it occurred, was not verbal. Instead, impressions, images, and emotions flooded her consciousness. One entity projected sequences of glowing, geometric patterns, which carried both meaning and emotion, conveying abstract concepts that Laura struggled to interpret. At times, she perceived fleeting visions of distant landscapes, barren plains illuminated by multiple moons, structures with precise yet alien architecture, and machines of intricate complexity moving in synchronized rhythm. Each image was accompanied by an emotional tone, urgency, curiosity, caution, that bypassed language entirely. Laura realized that the entity's methods of communication were not designed for comprehension in conventional terms. Instead, they were interacting directly with her perception, embedding messages in ways that could only be experienced, not understood logically. Physical sensations were equally precise and invasive. The entity's probes traced patterns along her arms and torso, leaving faint, circular impressions that burned slightly upon contact. She felt points of pressure and tingling at locations that did not correspond to visible stimuli, as though the probes could interface directly with her nervous system. The sensations were neither purely painful nor entirely benign. They existed in a liminal space that magnified her sense of vulnerability. Her breathing became shallow, constrained by the overwhelming presence of these beings and the controlled environment they had created. Every nerve ending felt acutely aware of external influence, and every attempt to escape or resist was met with subtle, yet absolute countermeasures. As the experience progressed, Laura noticed that time had become both expansive and fragmented. What she perceived as continuous observation, an extended session of invasive examination, later seemed, upon reflection, to have occurred in mere minutes. The subjective stretching and compressing of time created a disorienting effect, reinforcing the sense that the encounter existed on a plane outside conventional reality. Even after the entities withdrew, the temporal distortions lingered in her perception, manifesting as flashbacks, altered awareness of elapsed time, and a persistent sense that normal chronological flow was unreliable. When the visitation ended, it was as abrupt as it had begun. The shimmering entities faded into the walls and ceiling, the room's geometry returned to its normal form, and the humming dissipated, leaving Laura gasping, trembling, and drenched in sweat. She collapsed onto her bed, hyperventilating, struggling to reconcile the events she had just endured with the reality of her surroundings. Yet the traces remained. Faint circular impressions on her arms, subtle distortions in the bedding, and an air tinged with metallic warmth served as persistent reminders that what she had experienced had been real in a way that defied conventional explanation. Even hours later, the sensation of presence lingered, a soft pressure in the corners of the room, a subtle vibration under the floorboards, and the recurring awareness of being observed. The psychological aftermath was profound. Laura developed heightened anxiety around nighttime, an acute fear of being alone, and recurring intrusive dreams that replayed the events in vivid detail. Normal sleep cycles were disrupted, and she experienced chronic fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and persistent hypervigilance. Socially and emotionally, she became withdrawn, her interactions tinged with subtle fear and distrust, as though the boundaries between private and external space had been irrevocably violated. The encounter left her questioning the stability of her own perceptions, the reliability of her memory, and even the fundamental nature of reality itself. Physically, the lingering effects were subtle but tangible. Circular impressions on her wrists and shoulders took days to fade, and a persistent tingling in her forearms and spine reminded her that the intrusion had left an imprint. Electrical devices in her room, previously stable, began to malfunction sporadically. Lights flickered without cause, the digital clock occasionally reset, and electronic alarms registered phantom signals. The combination of environmental anomalies, physical traces, and psychological impact created a convergence of evidence that was both personal and tangible, defying simple explanation. In reflecting on this encounter, several recurring themes of prior abduction narratives became apparent. Immobility, vivid environmental manipulation, telepathic or nonverbal communication, and invasive physical examination all aligned with other reports, but the intensity and scope of the experience placed it at the extreme end of the spectrum. The entities exhibited a sophisticated understanding of human perception, consciousness, and physical vulnerability. Their methods combined fear, fascination, and precision, producing an experience that challenged every aspect of Laura's comprehension and left her profoundly altered. The encounter, while harrowing, also emphasized a deeper pattern: the deliberate targeting of human vulnerability, the manipulation of perception, and the complex interplay between mind and environment. By integrating sensory, psychological, and physical dimensions, the visitation transcended ordinary nightmares or hallucinations, creating an episode that demanded recognition and reflection. For Laura, the event became both a personal crucible and a compelling case study, illustrating the profound effects of alien bedroom visitations and the unresolved mysteries surrounding their motives, methods, and ultimate purpose. What stands out most when all of these accounts are placed side by side is not just the strangeness of the individual stories, but the eerie coherence between them. Each abductee, regardless of background, location, or culture, emerges from their experience carrying the same emotional residue: confusion, fear, and a sense of irreversible change. In revisiting these narratives, one cannot help but notice how the boundaries between dream and waking life blur under the weight of such vivid detail. The fragments each person retains, images of glowing figures, patterns of light, sensations of paralysis and probing, accumulate into a tapestry that feels more deliberate than random. Though each testimony differs in its particulars, the rhythm, symbols, and after-effects repeat with uncanny consistency, as if all these separate lives are chapters in a larger, hidden story. The most shocking incidents echo in memory, not as isolated nightmares, but as shared experiences that span generations. The first story, the solitary bedroom visitation, revealed how a single, sudden intrusion could dismantle a person's sense of security. The second escalated, introducing unusual entities and subtle environmental distortions. The third widened the scope, showing how an entire family could be pulled into the same surreal moment, each person perceiving fragments of the same impossible scene. By the fourth and fifth accounts, The tone had shifted from bewilderment to near-clinical observation. The being's technology and telepathic communication were described with an almost resigned familiarity, as if the abductees had been forced to study their own tormentors. The final and most terrifying encounter brought these strands together: paralysis, manipulation of reality, invasive examination, and lingering physical traces, forming a climax that left not just the witness but also the audience unsettled. Across these stories, patterns emerge with striking clarity. Timing is consistent. The early morning hours, between 1 and 3 a.m., when REM sleep peaks and the body is naturally paralyzed. The methods are consistent: sudden immobilization, environmental distortion, telepathic impressions, and invasive physical contact. Even the aftermath is consistent: memory gaps, circular marks on the skin, disrupted electronics, and long-term sleep disturbances. These similarities persist despite geographic separation and cultural differences, suggesting that the phenomenon, whatever its nature, follows a structure that transcends individual psychology. The unexplained phenomena threaded throughout these accounts add another layer of complexity. Objects move without contact, lights flicker without power fluctuations, and electronic devices malfunction in ways that seem synchronized with the presence of the entities. Some abductees report seeing geometric symbols projected onto walls or ceilings, patterns that remain burned into their memory long after the visitation ends. Others describe auditory phenomena: low-frequency humming, pulsating tones, or whispered voices just at the edge of comprehension. These sensory elements, while subjective, are too consistent across reports to dismiss entirely as mere coincidence or imagination. They hint at a technology, or an effect, capable of altering perception, environment, and even the body itself in ways humans do not yet understand. Yet it is not only the anomalies that endure, but also the emotional scars. Abductees frequently describe a lifelong shift in their worldview, a transformation of their sense of safety and autonomy. Nighttime, once a refuge, becomes a source of dread. Sleep, once restorative, becomes a threshold into vulnerability. Relationships strain under the weight of disbelief or fear, as those who have not experienced such events struggle to empathize with those who have. Some abductees retreat into isolation, their experiences too strange to share. Others become advocates, seeking understanding and connection through support groups and research organizations. The psychological consequences are real and measurable. Chronic anxiety, recurring nightmares, heightened sensitivity to noise or light, and, in some cases, symptoms akin to post-traumatic stress disorder. Memory itself plays a pivotal role in the haunting nature of these encounters. Many abductees recall only fragments: a flash of a black eye hovering over them, the sensation of floating, a geometric light seared into their vision. Hypnotic regression or therapy sometimes brings additional details to the surface, but these revelations often raise as many questions as they answer. Are these memories accurate? Are they implanted, manipulated, or distorted by trauma? Even skeptics who attribute abduction accounts to sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucination admit that the emotional realism of these memories exceeds that of ordinary dreams. The abductees' insistence on their authenticity, even at personal cost, underscores the deep imprint these experiences leave on the human mind. Another chilling pattern is the escalation over time. Initial encounters are often subtle: strange noises, fleeting figures, or brief paralysis episodes. With each recurrence, however, the intrusions grow bolder, more invasive, and more complex. In some cases, abductees describe being shown images or messages hinting at a larger agenda: warnings about environmental collapse, glimpses of alien worlds, or cryptic suggestions of hybrid programs. Whether literal or symbolic, these messages suggest intentionality, a sense that the entities are not merely visiting but interacting with a purpose beyond human understanding. This progression leaves abductees in a constant state of uncertainty, questioning not only what happened but what may yet come. Despite decades of reports, research, and speculation, the central mysteries remain unresolved. Are these experiences external events, psychological constructs, or some interplay of both? If external, what are the motives of the entities? Scientific curiosity, benevolent guidance, or something far more sinister? If internal, how can such complex, consistent phenomena arise spontaneously in so many minds? These questions persist because no single explanation fully accounts for the breadth and depth of the data. The phenomenon resists being neatly categorized, existing instead in a liminal space between belief and skepticism, science and myth, dream and waking reality. For the abductees, however, the intellectual debate is secondary to the lived experience. They are not concerned primarily with whether the entities are extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or psychological projections. What they remember is the feeling, the weight pressing down on their chests, the black eyes staring into theirs, the paralysis that robs them of agency, and the certainty that something intelligent and powerful is operating just beyond the limits of human comprehension. These memories, even when fragmented, are not easily dismissed. They resurface at unexpected moments, during sleepless nights, in the flicker of a light bulb, or in the faint hum of an appliance, reminders of an encounter that transcends explanation. And so, as the stories converge in this conclusion, one truth becomes unavoidable. For those who have endured bedroom visitations, the experience never fully ends. Even years later, the memories remain vivid, accompanied by a lingering sense of presence, as though the entities who once intruded are not entirely gone but watching, waiting, perhaps choosing their next moment to return. This final thought is the most chilling of all, for it suggests that the phenomenon is ongoing, not historical, active, not passive. It implies that the boundary between observer and observed, between witness and subject, is far thinner than we wish to believe. It is this possibility, that the entities could still be watching, perhaps even tonight, that leaves both abductees and those who study them unsettled. It transforms these narratives from mere stories into living warnings, reminders that our sense of safety may be more fragile than we imagine. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world is still and our minds drift between waking and sleep, who can say with certainty what shadows move just beyond the edge of perception? For the abductees, the question is not hypothetical. It is the echo of a memory, the whisper of a presence, and the knowledge that reality itself may be more porous than we dare to admit.